The EU Commission has fined X 120 million euros. So I'll talk about why that is, what they say, and what I think is likely to happen in this video. But also, the UK economy is in tatters. I hate to say I told you so, but I was right. When Labour were first elected, I was very vocal, and I have been vocal since. And it turns out that I've been right about what I've been saying so far, in that things are bad when Poundland is cutting lots of shops, hundreds of shops, and employers are cutting staff at higher rates than since the pandemic, and unemployment is up to 5%. So it turns out I was right. Let's take a look at it in this video. So please do subscribe to the channel. We are nearing 900,000 subscribers. It is just that tick away. Please do that. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at this. So I'll come back to X in a minute, but I read now that Poundland is reducing its number of shops from around 800 or so to down to around 650. So they are closing over 150 stores. So if you think about the number of people that stack the shelves, that open up, that man the tills, that run the place and everything else, all of those staff are going to be cut because there is business uncertainty. There is increased costs on the businesses themselves and the employer national insurance and everything else, which I said was a fundamentally stupid thing to do. But nonetheless, they are doing that. And the budget with the uncertainty and everything else makes for some fairly grim statistics. So, when the likes of Keir Starmer and the rest of the cabinet are saying, we're increasing jobs, we're creating new jobs, and the economy's being rebuilt and everything else. Well, the statistics tell you a very different picture. Now, these are not my statistics. These are genuinely real statistics. So let's have a look at the Office for National Statistics. One of the recent reports here. This is the latest for the earnings and employment from pay-as-you-earn real-time information, just out, recently out in November. Among the main points, compare October 2025 with the year before, at 180,000 fewer employees. Remember this statistic when you get politicians telling you that we are creating more jobs. There are 180,000 fewer employees from the year before. The largest increase is in public administration and defence sector, of course, with Labour in power, more people in public administration, with a rise of 16,000 employees. But the largest decrease was in the wholesale and the retail sector, with a fall of 71,000 employees. So this absolutely has Labour to a T. You compare where the employees are going up and down, 16,000 more in public administration, civil servants and stuff, and a decrease for businesses of 71,000. So when people say Labour is an anti-business party, this is the statistics proving what they say. 71,000 fewer in wholesale and retail sector. Then they compare October and September this year. There was a decrease. Remember, obviously, we had another budget coming up for November, which we've just had. Now, with all that in mind, and with all the uncertainty and everything else, between September and October alone, payroll employment decreased by 32,000 employees. And it says this should be treated as provisional. Estimates are likely to be revised when more data is received. They're likely to go up, in my opinion, because a lot of these have been revised, and this will explain why. The next bullet point, UK payroll employee growth for September compared with August 25 has been revised from a decrease of 10,000 to a decrease of 32,000. So that's why I say these numbers are likely to go up. I can also see from this graph here, this is from the Telegraph, businesses freeze hiring and cut jobs. Now, this trend has been going since 2022, but it is certainly not helped. And you can see the sharp change here for unemployment. This is just recently, and this sharper drop here in vacancies, both of which have been exacerbated by Labour's policies because they are hitting businesses, they are hitting business costs. And as I said, as soon as they were elected, and I've been sort of vocal about it ever since, all of my predictions are right. They are increasing the costs on businesses. They're increasing the costs of doing business. And if it becomes more expensive to do something, then fewer people are going to do it, and they're going to reduce what they're doing because it is just not workable anymore. I did post recently that the employment rights bill. So if you get one thing that is making employers, businesses uncertain now is that there is now going to be an unlimited compensation for employees that claim unfair dismissal. Now, that could simply wipe out a company if they have a successful claim and the tribunal rules, I don't know, £300,000-400,000 against the company. That could just kill the company, along with all the other employees as well. This is why businesses are so uncertain. And all of that now is why you get headlines like this. The Bank of England is issuing an urgent economy warning as employers are cutting staff at the fastest pace since the pandemic. So even the Bank of England is issuing this warning saying this is urgent. The UK economy is imploding and it's a damage to businesses and employees and they're cutting staff and so on. All of which I said and I predicted as soon as Labour were into power and they started to indicate what they were going to do. We've seen schools closed. We've seen businesses closing at the fastest rate, employers dropping at the fastest rate. It is just incredible. And by the way, there is some positivity in that I would really like to help people to create their own new business, do things for themselves. That is why I created I'm calling it my money channel, my Daniel Shensmith channel. I'll link that below. Pop over there and subscribe. I'm on that channel. I'm talking about money and business and wealth creation and saving money where you can, making money where you can, staying within the rules, doing things properly, and making the best of things for you. I'm going to do many more videos on there because I really feel that this is needed. So do jump along there and subscribe to that channel as well. But these statistics absolutely prove what's going on here. I'll talk more about that on my money channel. Very brief word. I have to comment on this one, completely off the subject to a completely different subject here. We have Nadia Whittome MP talking about the trans issue again, which I cover in a number of videos. But this is the kind of mentality you have with MPs here and what they are saying they want to legislate for. Listen to this, what she says here. She says that she wants to lift the puberty blockers ban, meaning she wants us to be able to administer these life-changing, altering drugs to children, which have irreversible consequences, such as fertility and so on. She wants to lift that ban, even though it was in place because there's no evidence that it's safe, and we have no idea what impact this is going to have on those children long-term. Bearing in mind, children can't get married, they can't smoke, they can't drink, they can't get a tattoo, but say that they think that they're a girl when they're really a boy. Sure, she wants to give them drugs to change things. I'm against that. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm not going to shout you down if you have a different opinion on that, but that is just my opinion. I don't think we should be doing that with children. But it gets worse. She also then says that we should reject the EHRC guidance. That is that we should keep women's spaces for women and men's spaces for men. That is what the guidance is going to be, that we should keep those separate so women have the privacy and dignity of keeping their own spaces and men not being allowed into those spaces. She wants to reject that guidance. But it gets worse still, that her third bullet point here, she says she wants to legislate. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, right? She says she wants to legislate to ensure that single-sex spaces are trans inclusive by default. Now, a trans identifying man is a man who thinks he's a woman and wants to live his life as a woman, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, I have no issue with that if that's what they want to do, but it doesn't and shouldn't encroach on the rights of others. I am friendly with any trans folk who write to me and have actually shared these views of mine. So this is not me attacking. This is not me being nasty. This is not me being in any way discriminatory or nasty or anything with anyone who identifies as trans. Some of you watching may not agree with that premise at all, and that's fine as well, because you're entitled to have your opinion. You're entitled to express your opinion. But if anyone who is trans, I'm not speaking against you. It is against the principle that we should erode the rights of everyone else. So what Nadia Whittome effectively is saying here, let's use the analogy with veganism. If you are a vegan or just a vegetarian or whatever, then this is the equivalent of saying, let's legislate to ensure that all vegan people must be forced to eat meat, sometimes without their knowledge, and they're not allowed to complain about it. Otherwise, they might be criticized for being discriminatory against the people that want to give them the meat. So let's legislate to ensure that all vegans must eat meat and that must be allowed by default. That is effectively what she's saying here, except obviously not for veganism and meat, but she's saying it for sex spaces. So she's effectively saying, let's legislate so that all women must allow men into those spaces by default, whether they know about it, whether they agree with it, and they can't object to it. Otherwise, they will be labeled for being discriminatory and transphobic. So as I've said in previous videos, you can hold both views. You can both be supportive of trans people to accept them for who they are, at the same time as not accepting that they are allowed to go in the opposite sex bathrooms and changing rooms and things like that. You can hold both views, and that is not transphobic. Equally, you can have the philosophical belief that absolutely they cannot change sex. That just does not change. And biologically, that is factually true. And this, in fact, I think is where some of the real danger comes, because some people are trying to perpetuate the idea that if you take hormones and things like that, that because your cells regenerate, that they then become female if you were born male, and that because your cells regenerate and they become female, some people are genuinely trying to say that eventually you become female, and it's just absolute nonsense. Now, I'm not a doctor, but that is just complete nonsense. Anyway, so moving on. Now, also, as I promised in this video, the EU Commission, now, if you've watched my channel for long enough, or you know me well enough, you'll know my views on the EU as regards to law and regulation in general. You'll know my views about that. Now, the latest thing is that the EU now purports to fine X 120 million euros. Now, you can, if you've been on X long enough, or you've had an idea of what Elon Musk is like, you can probably guess as to what his reaction to this is going to be like. But let's take an objective view. Let's have a look at what it's been fined for, what exactly they say. Now, let's take a look at these in turn. In very broad strokes, the EU Commission says that X has misled users because by being able to buy effectively a verified badge on X, that it suggests that there's a level of trust or authenticity that is not true, and that it could be confused with official accounts or authoritative sources. But I just don't buy that. I don't think that the average user is going to be in any way confused by someone having a blue check to say that they've paid for premium X. And in any event, government ministers, government officials, official companies, they each have a grayed out check, and those are different checks, and you can distinguish those. And MPs have got a grayed check mark as well, which indicates that they're an official person. And in any event, it's absolutely clear as to what it is. There's a page here that explains it for you. It says the blue check mark means that the account has an active subscription on X Premium and meets the eligibility requirements. They began winding down the legacy verification program, which was the previous one that they verify, someone of some prominence or whatever, and accounts that were verified under the previous criteria, active, notable, and authentic, not retain the blue check mark unless they're subscribed to X Premium. Eligibility criteria. Must be a complete account, inactive use, must have a confirmed phone number, must not be deceptive, and so on. And this is all made absolutely clear. So I don't buy the confusion there whatsoever. They also talk about a lack of transparency. So they say that platforms must clearly show who's paid for an advert, why is a user being targeted, or who stands behind political or issue-based adverts. They say that X has failed to provide this information, which is a core requirement of the Digital Services Act, which is what they purport to have fined X under. And it's the first fine of its kind, and they're sort of standing up all proud of the fact that they've issued this fine, which many people, in my view, rightly are saying that this is just an attack upon free speech, etc. So there are some plain counter-arguments to this, what I think is a ridiculous claim against X. So they claim that the blue tick is misleading. Well, for one, users were told very clearly, very plainly, that verification was being replaced by a subscription model. Everyone knew it. Everyone knows it. It was absolutely clear. It no longer means that their identity has been verified in the same way that it was before, but instead that they are a paid subscriber. This was absolutely clear. The EU's claim also assumes that users are incapable of understanding this simple change. And Besides the point, Meta have done exactly the same thing across Instagram and Facebook. And there's no indication that anyone's confused by that either. So the EU Commission seems to think that users are incapable of understanding that this is a simple subscription model. Now, consumer law, both in the UK and around the rest of Europe, does not require that platforms infantilize their users and assume that they are stupid and that they can't understand these things and that they can't understand the simple symbol changes. And adapting to them really is not a regulatory failure. I think that's a bit nonsense. Also, as a matter of law, for something to be misleading, it requires some kind of deception, not just that some people might misunderstand it or a disagreement with the design choice or something like that. For something to be misleading, it must be misleading you, leading you to think something that is not true. Misleading. And I don't think that's true. So to be unlawful, it would have to be, in my view, would have to be intentionally or negligently deceptive to make you think something that really it isn't. And the clear public statements all undermine that proposition. So I just don't think that's true at all. Much like LinkedIn has premium badges to say that they've paid for LinkedIn Pro, YouTube has verified as well. None of these are misleading users either, and I don't think this is any different whatsoever. But X already provides an ad transparency center and arguably more information, more detailed information than some competitors. Many other platforms might well have similar complaints made against them. Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, they may all have similar gaps, and yet fines of this scale have not been levied against them. I think that the EU Commission has a personal vendetta against Elon Musk. But I just don't agree that there is this huge gap in transparency here. And as to X refusing to provide access to data for researchers, they claim that they've failed to provide access to data sets for people who want to research things with what's been posted on X. Now, first of all, X has a legal obligation to its users to protect their privacy, both ironically under GDPR, among other things. Now, giving raw information or access to engagement data to researchers and things like that could, in theory, breach millions of other users' privacy rights because it will provide information and a data set on those users. So again, ironically, under what the EU protects so fiercely for data protection with regard to GDPR, for example, giving access to all of that data to researchers may inadvertently breach users' privacy rights at the same time. Many of those groups may be accused of being activist groups with political objectives rather than being neutral academics. So X could probably argue that disclosing this data might risk the manipulation of the platform data, the data sets, or may be used to support or underpin biased studies, which obviously X may not agree with. Also, meaningful access under the Digital Services Act. This is a little bit vague in itself, so I don't think X can really be punished and penalized for failing to comply with a requirement that lacks the technical specifications and specificity that it really should require. And then finally, we come on to a point of security, which may well be compromised by giving extensive access to its data sets to external researchers. So on the whole, I just don't really agree with that. But as to what will happen realistically, well, on the one hand, the Digital Services Act is obviously an EU regulatory regime for very large platforms that serves its platform in the EU, and technically and in theory, it grants the Commission the power to levy a financial penalty against such a company up to 6% of global annual turnover for serious breaches. Their press release confirms that's what they've done, and so under its procedures, it's got everything right, and they have the authority to do that within the EU. But as to whether it will actually result in a payment by X is another matter. Obviously, there's the global jurisdiction aspect to it, in that X is a global company, but it's headquartered outside of the EU. Enforcement, therefore, is going to depend on cooperation, locating assets, which can be very complicated. X is likely to go through appeals and litigation and challenges, not least of which with the US now taking a very firm stance on free speech, protecting its First Amendment, which it can argue. And it could also argue that this fine will pose an insolvency risk or financial distress and thus claim an inability to pay. So at the very least, this might be dragged out for many years, and it is far from guaranteed that it's actually going to make this payment. So whilst the headlines say it's been fined and it gives you the impression that it has to pay it. Ironically, I think that's a bit misleading because many of these headlines say this has happened and that's what you think. It's just like the headlines claiming jury trials have been abolished, which is not true. It's still got to go through both houses of parliament, become law, etc. Doesn't mean that it may not actually happen, but it will take some time to do that. And that's what they're planning to do, which I'm against, by the way. But the headlines say this has happened is not absolutely crystal clear. Ironically, headlines like that are misleading. And so the EU Commission saying we've fined X 120 million euros doesn't really mean anything yet, at least, unless it agrees to pay or eventually pays it. So my prediction, at least in the short term, almost certainly will refuse to pay, then drag it through appeals and challenges, which will take several years. Even if ultimately it loses, whilst the EU will obviously have a strong enforcement within the EU via the assets and seizure and things like that. The EU obviously cannot, in my view, enforce any kind of fine in the US, where obviously X is headquartered. But obviously X does depend on some advertisers within the EU. So eventually I think it will be some sort of a piecemeal thing. I think X certainly won't pay for many years. It will peel everything. And ultimately the EU may win on some issues, may lose on some others. And eventually I think there'll be some kind of compromise and eventually it'll just fizzle away. But X, I think, certainly with Elon Musk, is going to make this very difficult for the EU Commission. It's certainly not going to be a straightforward thing. You've been fined, you've got to pay it. I think it'll be dragged out for many years. So not absolutely clear cut, but that's what I think. So I hope you found that useful. Please do remember to subscribe to the channel. And as always, thank you for watching.